this is the main dashboard page of Jenkins. And you can access this page by going to this URL, GitHub Actions, and then port 8080. Actually, I'll show you. I still need to make a login for you, but basically you'll be greeted by this page. Welcome to Jenkins. Type in username and password. And then this is the page it kind of greets you with. I guess just kind of like an overview of this page. These are all the Jenkins jobs that I've created. And you can see here that they're basically set up for running different sorts of tests. So you have Cypress Tests, integration tests, unit tests here, conversion tests. And then I also made like some sample backup files just in case, like as I'm messing around with these, if I change anything that maybe breaks something. Excuse me. I just have these as a reference to go back to. Well, I guess let me jump to Manage Jenkins. Manage Jenkins is, as you can imagine, where all the different configuration settings for Jenkins are applied. I'm going to start with the Manage plugins, just because this is kind of like where you'll start out for the most part when you're configuring a Jenkins server. One thing to keep in mind here, by default, Jenkins already comes with a lot of plugins pre-installed, but I think there are two off the top of my head that I installed myself. The first one here is this GitHub pull request builder. Basically what this does is you can set it up to give it a specific repository to pull against. And if it detects any sort of new pull requests that are created, it'll execute a job in Jenkins based on that pull request that was created. And you'll see more as to how that configuration gets applied. But that's what this plugin does. And then there's another one that I installed here. This multiple SCMs plugin. I'll go into this one a bit more as well when we look at like the specific job configuration. But basically this lets you have, as it says here, enables the selection of multiple source code management systems for a build. And I'll point that out when we get into the jobs, but this is just one I installed manually. So these two are the ones to kind of keep in mind, are the multiple SCMs plugin and then the GitHub pull request folder plugin. But that's, and I guess just to kind of point out from the plugin manager page as well, you can see what plugins need updates, and it'll tell you, like, for example, this, like, the version we have, or sorry, the latest version available, what's installed, and then when it was released. If it's basically, if it's not related to those two plugins, I don't give it too much attention, but there are some here that I'll probably go back and look at later on, like this Git and GitHub plugin. Those might be worth looking at. But a lot of the other ones I'm seeing here don't seem as important, so it's not too critical to get those updated. And then available is where you can actually search for, like, if a plugin exists. So let's see, I think GitHub. Yeah, so you can see like different plugins that are available in Jenkins that other people have pushed up. So maybe if you're reading through some documentations and they reference like a specific plugin to try, then this is where you'll be able to find it. I don't touch this. But a few different configuration settings here. It looks like, yeah, if you have a plugin that you want to upload to it, then that's an option. But typically, these are the three that you deal with when working in the plugin manager. So the global tool configuration option here, this is where you can pre-configure different sorts of settings within Jenkins. And I guess just as an example, like, I don't know if you recall when we had to log you in to the like docker.intrinsic.com, when we had to use the npm install, when we were trying to install like the i5 test repo onto your computer. That's one thing that I have pre-installed here. I might have applied it directly to the .npmrc file, but that's one example of what you can pre-configure within like the global tools configuration. So specifically within like Node.js, you can see that so for some of these like pre-installations, like this is what gets executed at the beginning of a job. So for example, like these are the packages that installs when a job begins within Jenkins. So for Cypress Tests, I have it installing this specific version of Cypress. There's a wait on npm package, and then it goes through like the same sort of like here. Incidentally, yeah. So then after it installs Cypress, and then the wait on plugin, go full plugins, all those same sorts of packages. And then there's also a specific node version I have installed with. I want to say that's the version I have on my computer right now. But you can pick between different node versions, like if there's something that isn't working in particular, like maybe a specific plugin that needs a specific version of node to run. And same with Mocha here. So I also made like a configuration using Mocha for jobs in Jenkins that run using Mocha. Same sort of practice. So all it does is just install Mocha and then specific version. That's pretty much all I do with tool configuration. And then configure system. So you'll see here, you can basically pre-configure different sort of settings within Jenkins on this main like, overview page. And so this is where you can configure different settings for plugins as well. So for example, here, like the GitHub pull request builder, I have that set up with like, GitHub server API URL, my credentials for GitHub, and you can actually, within this plugin, so test basic connection to GitHub, and then I'll see that plugin is me. And then I can also test like permissions to a repo. So if I put in and so it's detecting that I have access to this repo, and then I also have push and pull permissions. So those are different sorts of settings you can configure within like overview, like Jenkins configuration page. I'm trying to see if there's anything else I can figure on this page other than GitHub pull request builder. Yeah, so that's just one thing to keep in mind is like with plugins in particular, and specifically with the GitHub pull request builder, this is where it's configured. Okay. So actually, if we go back, so I'm not sure if you noticed, but when we were looking at that GitHub pull request builder, you can see here that there were like pre-installed credentials and like encrypted password. So that gets set up under the managed credentials here. So you can see that like it already has a JE and then a password. And then if you actually click into Jenkins, you just click add credentials, and it lets you fill in like any additional passwords that you want accessible by Jenkins. Then I guess there's a lot of other options available in Jenkins here, but I don't really, or haven't really had to touch any of these other ones for the most part. I guess one thing to keep in mind here, and this is where I'll add you, is that there's a users page, so you can see who has access to this Jenkins server, and then I'll make a new user for you, and like right after this meeting probably. But that's kind of like where you can manage users, and then system log is really useful. You can actually see different sorts of feedback reported by Jenkins when a specific job is executing. And so you won't see much here right now just because most of the Jenkins jobs are stopped or paused right now. But for example here, like it seems like this pull request is updated, but there aren't any new comments or commits. This is feedback that's provided by that GitHub pull request builder. And so just to keep in mind, like if you go to system log here, there's more information that I'll show like when it's executing, but like this is where you'll see it run, and it can provide a lot of useful feedback here. That pretty much covers it, at least for like the Manage Jenkins page. Let me go back to the main dashboard. So you'll see here, like you saw before, the different Jenkins jobs that are already set up. You can make those by starting with new item, and then there are different types of jobs. All these are freestyle projects, but the two most important types to keep in mind are freestyle and then pipeline. I'll go into the differences between those in a second, but I'll just give it like name project. And so this is the main page for how a job gets configured. But that's all there is to just making a job in Jenkins. Let me go into these jobs more specifically. So just starting out looking at like the Cypress job, configure, same page that we saw before. This one in particular starts out with referencing a specific project URL, which is just the i5 repo. And that's just says this project is disabled right now. So this goes back to the multiple source code management plugin that I installed in Jenkins. This references the i5 Cypress repo and then the i5 repo. And all it does is it just clones both of them within Jenkins. So you'll see here, like, uses my credentials, and then it, like, the branch specifier is just master, so it clones the master i5 Cypress branch. And then it checks out to, it basically just creates a folder called i5 Cypress in Jenkins. And then same thing here, i5 Cypress, or i5 repo, and then the specific branch specifier, SHA-1. There's more information on where that comes from. I'll have to look a bit more because I don't remember off the top of my head. But there was a doc that we were basically referencing for creating this job in particular. Let's see if I can find it. I think I had it pulled up here. Yeah, so this is where we pulled those from. And you can see, like, excuse me, name origin, ref spec, this is what they reference. It goes in more into detail about if you just want to build PRs, then that's what you use. And then PRs and branches, but we just do PRs. And then SHA-1. If you want to use the actual commit in the pull request, yeah, pull request instead of SHA-1. So that's where all that comes from, basically. And I will actually put this into back here just so you have that. You can look at that later. Okay, so then the next step, at least, so this is a freestyle project, so it starts out by like your source code management, pulling the code basically from Cypress and then the i5 repo. Then it goes into build trigger, which is just what causes the job itself to trigger. So this one's set right now for the GitHub pull request builder. And you should see here. So there's a trigger phrase I have set on this one. So within the PR itself, if someone types in run ETE test, then it'll run that test or run a test against that PR. And then contract line, I have this set for 2. If I remember right, I think that has it refresh every 2 minutes to check to see if this run test is on any of those PRs. Yeah, so you can see here, would have last run 317 and then next run is 319. And then the whitelist. I have this set as intrinsic-org here just because there was an issue I ran into where the GitHub pull request builder was giving some sort of message back in different pull requests saying like a user wasn't authorized to run this job. So I had to add this intrinsic -org so it wouldn't give that message back. Members whitelisted as admins. And pull every without asking, yeah. That's just basically so the different devs that have access in GitHub can post these different trigger phrases without getting any sort of pushback from Jenkins. And then the build environment. So this goes back to the source code management. So you'll see here that it deletes the workspace, and then it provides node npm build, which is the one I created back in that global tools configuration. It was called Cypress, so that's the one that it uses. And then I have this npm-rc file, which just uses my credentials when it logs in, all the different packages and stuff from the npm. Cache location, I just use the default for this. And then just build here. So build it, you can specifically put in the set of commands that it goes through and executes within within Linux. So I have it set up so it changes to the i5 directory. It actually this was an issue I ran into where I had to create a specific file or specific config.json file because of I was getting some error back. I think it was the Elasticsearch version it was using, so I just have to put that file in there. Runs an npm install, both CSS, and then it sets up, or it changes to an i5 folder, i5 Cypress folder, does the npm install on that, and then it starts up the server, and then it waits for when localhost 3000 is available, and then it runs the commands against, or the different tests against that. One thing that I'll jump back to really quickly, so that workspace I'm kind of referencing here, if this makes it easier to visualize, is these are just folders that it makes. So it creates a folder within Jenkins, or I guess you can imagine the Linux, like Linux running Jenkins. Within Linux, it creates these folders. So i5, and these are just temporary folders. So i5 and then i5 Cypress. So just imagine there's this i5 folder. This is where Informer is getting installed from GitHub, or getting cloned rather from GitHub. And then i5 Cypress, same sort of deal. So this is where all the different tests are getting cloned from GitHub. And so once it finishes cloning and then installing the packages for i5 and then i5 Cypress, then it goes through and you'll see, go back to the build. So yeah, then it goes back here, gulp dev, and then changes back, or references this i5 folder where it runs gulp dev. And then since we're still in the i5 Cypress folder, then it just runs npx cypress run. And then you can set up different sort of post-build actions. So in this case, there's a folder that I have set where the test execution results are stored, and those just get reported back in Jenkins. And that's actually, I go back here, that's where these are coming from, or just from those results that are getting reported within that folder. So when you make a job, this is the default page that you'll see. Changes. Oh, I actually have not used this, but that's good to know. So you can see different changes that are made to that job itself, as I'm editing through it. Workspace goes back to different folders that are made when the job executes. Configure is just where you go if you want to edit the job. Delete project, definitely not going to touch that, but that's if you want to delete it. GitHub, I think, goes back to whatever's configured. Yeah, so that goes back to whatever GitHub URL is configured within the job itself. And then rename, just if you want to rename the test. And then build history too, so you can see more some information. So this actually comes in from the GitHub pull request builder. And if I click on that, I should actually say that there's a lot to go through. I'm not going to quite go through this yet. We have parameters here. So this is what that SHA-1 is referencing. And this is all information that the GitHub pull request builder actually pulls in when that trigger goes off for that specific phrase. So in the case, like run E2E test, and then it detects like a new pull request. So this is where it gets that information. So SHA-1, the actual commit. So the author in this case was Holly, and then gets her email from, I guess that's our login for GitHub. Let's see if there's another one here. Not really, but just keep in mind, like this is where you can kind of reference and see where it comes from if you wanted to get more information about it. So yeah, from build history, and then in this case it was under parameters. Oh, also like if there's a fail test, you can just tell by the circle here. Because I stopped it, I think. Let's see if I can find. I think it might be a good example. Yeah, so you can see here when there are test failures, those also get reported within that folder that was specified within that job configuration. So test results, if I click on that, you can see which test failed. When we have this running and more like devs were testing against it, it would actually report which tests, or I guess the number of tests that passed and failed back in that pull request as well. And actually I can give an example of that. So this is within that same, so within like this, it's all documented here, just as the example I'm about to show, but you can see here, so in this case, like it'll give a little message saying like from Jenkins, like job is triggered and then test pass. And I have it set up specifically where it reports back which ones passed and failed, but in this example, it just gives a message back saying test pass or failed. Actually, one thing, like where you can configure that, if I go back to Cypress Tests, here. Okay. Yes, here we go. So within this GitHub pull request option, within like build triggers, what option was that? It was, yeah, trigger setup. Okay, cool. So within that trigger setup option, you can see here that these are the different like results it'll give back. So this is just context or context you can set up. So this is what it'll say when the job is actually executing. And then once it finishes and gives the results back, it'll say success, and then it says they were successful, error, and then failure, and they failed. And then I also checked off this add test result one-liners. That's where it pulls those results back from the XML file that gets generated, and just posts those back to GitHub. So one thing I want to mention too, the differences between like this Freestyle project and then the pipeline project. Well, actually I made a quick pipeline here. But so Freestyle is a bit more structured, I would say. We can kind of pick just the different options that are available, and then between like what GitHub repo you're pulling from, your build triggers, and then from commands, you just set up like which commands execute. The pipeline is much less structured in that way. So you can see here that like just general, like pick like a GitHub project. Your build triggers, you could still have it set up as a GitHub pull request builder. But then when you start getting to like, it becomes a bit more difficult when it comes, and this is the reason I use Freestyles, because when it comes to like having to clone from i5 and then having to clone from like i5 Cypress, and then having to jump back and forth and get the packages installed between them, that becomes a lot more difficult within Pipeline. With Pipeline, what it becomes is you basically set up different stages, and then you just put in what steps you want to execute within those stages, and it's completely open to you how those get executed. And you can kind of think of it, so like in this just hello world example, they created a stage called hello, and then all it does is just print hello world. But you can kind of think of it as like Actually, is this? Yeah, so then it just goes from like, you can create a build stage, a test stage, or release stage. And it becomes a lot to kind of juggle, which is why I haven't dealt with that too much. Instead, that's where I just use like the multiple SCM plugin, and that makes it a lot easier. But just kind of know like that's the difference between them, is that pipeline, you basically just write everything you want from scratch, and you choose like how it all executes. And this may be something like maybe like it moves in, or maybe like as it evolves and we work more with this, it may move into like using pipelines more. But right now, I've been having more success with freestyle. So, so I'm just trying to get it working in freestyle first before we move into like trying to do anything else with it. I'll just delete that just to show. I think the only other thing, actually, let me see what I had written down to go over. I think that, yeah, that pretty much covers everything I had. One thing I guess I can point out here is that there are different views that you can create as well. So I have like this Mocha test view, which are just all the tests that use Mocha to execute instead of Cypress. So that's just one place to kind of organize tests if you wanted to. Like maybe if there are more tests that get written, then that's how you can organize them, is with these views. Oh, so right now I'm just I kind of just want to show you this, just kind of like get an idea of how these, and just kind of understand how like Jenkins is set up. That might help make it a bit easier. So if I go into Jenkins, forgetting the path. Let's see. Oh, so you can kind of imagine it here that when that job executes, it creates this folder here, just called the job name. So I go for Cypress Tests. And so that goes back to the workspace that I showed before, where we had like the i5, the temporary folder, different folder for that. So that's how I guess it makes it a bit easier to kind of visualize it for me, is I just imagine like as I'm going through the job, I'm creating these different folders and like deciding what goes into them. Well, I guess I'm not gonna, the Mocha tests run a bit differently because the Mocha tests are already in the i5 repo. So they don't have to go through the trouble making like a separate i5 Cypress folder and cloning those contents. But that's how I like to imagine it, is that like I'm just working within this, I'm basically cloning i5, I'm working within this folder of the contents of i5, and I'm just installing different packages that need to run and running tests against those. So it's just kind of how you can think about like how Jenkins works. It just creates folders. You choose what goes in the contents of those folders. Typically, I think Jenkins is used for actually like creating different builds. But in this case, I mean, it's just an automation server, so you can literally have it do whatever you want. And in this case, like we're just having it run automated tests. So that's basically how Jenkins runs. I think a good thing that would help out a bit, just to kind of get an understanding, would be like if you just pick any of these jobs and then just go to configure. And I mean, they're pretty much configured the same way when it comes to like source code management, like just starting out with like the GitHub project. But the thing that's like more dramatically different between them are the commands that get executed within this build. If you wanted to like just open up any of these jobs and just take a look at what commands are used within build, that might help. And I think that helps. I think it's kind of tough just looking at them because like I kind of have a good idea of how they work just because I've gone through installing Informer and Cypress like so many times that like it's kind of just first nature. But I think if you wanted to kind of take a look at it and just kind of see like stepping through the different commands and just getting an idea of what's happening in each of them, And I think it might make more sense just as you get more familiar with like working with Informer and Cypress. I think this would be kind of like a good place to look at. But again, like I wouldn't say Jenkins is like isn't. I would say it's just not nearly as important as learning about like how to use Jira, how to work with, especially how to work with Informer and Cypress. But yeah, I would just say like if you want to take a look at Jenkins, like just kind of looking at these different commands that get executed would be probably the most beneficial thing. And I say that too, just because when I'm going in and actually like configuring these tests and editing them, there's not really anything I'm touching with anything before it. It's all with like the build that gets updated in and changes and testing around with it. But that's all I would say about that. Just looking at how the build executes and what order the commands get executed and what's happening, just kind of understanding that.